land. It's a GCB, the Moose, and the Candy Man. Like a freight train rolling, bringing truth bombs down the line. Promoting the Southland 1 week at a time. Promoting the Southland 1 week at a time. SCV chat starts now.
Well, good evening, everybody. Hope y'all are having a great week. We're back. Moose and I had to take a couple of weeks of hiatus. Stuff happens sometimes, and Moose was busy murdering small feathered critters, and I was at work.
Technically, I was working.
But we are back. We are back. We are back with a vengeance. Before we get started, as usual, the views and opinions expressed on this broadcast are not necessarily those of the SCV, GEC, any division, brigade, camps, or other subsidiaries, strictly those of us who are expressing them. Of course, we are here with one of our favorite historical or historian guests, Michael C. Hardy from the Old North State. Good evening, Michael. How are you doing?
Fantastic. How are y'all this evening?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy that I've stopped calling it the Tar Heel State. Evidently, that offends some people. So I don't know either. I got corrected.
Tar Heel
I got
State.
corrected one time on it.
Old North State. Who would correct you on the Tar Heel State?
Somebody from the Tar Heel State.
Well, they must have been of a different political persuasion.
Anyway. We're back here with our first half, at least first half. We may continue on of this season is dedicated to the American Revolution and the Southerners that helped shape that the first revolution, the Revolution of 1776. The heroes of our heroes is what Moose has kind of named it. Things that, we Southerners have a proud history that go from 1607 all the way to today. Things that we are, that make us who we are, that really defines the Southern culture and the Southern people. But we focus on just 4 years. We're trying to get out of that scope, trying to share the fact that America is America's culture is a Southern culture. America's history is Southern history, and all sides, or at least all parts of Southern history, deserve to be told. There was a movie that came out back in the 1970s called 1776. It was a musical, and one of the lines that sticks out in my head is when the war's recorded, it'll be Ben Franklin did this, Ben Franklin did that. Ben Franklin smoked the ground with his lightning stick, and out came George Washington, fully grown and on a horse. And the three of them, Franklin, Washington, and the horse, won the war together. And that's kind of what American history has done. It focuses on the stuff in the New England portion of the, especially the New England influences on the war, and doesn't really focus on the South. So we're wanting to bring focus on the South. First Monday of every month, we're dedicating to a portion of that history. And of course, tonight we have the Battle of Kings Mountain, a very important event that shaped the war. Michael will talk about that in a second. But before we get started on that, one little thing that we do want to remind everybody is that the SCV, of course, is taking donations. If you recall back to last month, we did a whole episode on the different things that we have going on as part of a national organization, a national front. We're just going to ask you that if you can, go ahead and donate. Go to the scv.org after the show. Click on the Donate Now button and donate via PayPal. You can also mail in your donations to headquarters. Anything and everything is greatly appreciated, especially now that it is tax season. Go ahead and get those nonprofit donations in. So, anyway, That's all I've got as far as cleaning up and intro stuff. Michael, if you want to go ahead and kick it off, we can start our talk.
Sure, fantastic. Well, I would actually like to start just a little before. I'd like to go back to, and I'd like to give you some background about some of these men. When we talk about the Battle of Kings Mountain, not everybody was a part of the Over Mountain men. They didn't all come from over the mountain. In fact, some of my ancestors involved came kind of scooted around the foothills of the mountain to join up with some of the Over Mountain men to go fight. But I want to go back a little further to start with. I want to go all the way back to 1763. What happened in 1763? I'm going to give you a question right off the bat.
1763.
It's really important to our story tonight.
Guessing some type of treaty or some type of tax.
Nope. So I won't torment you anymore. 1763 is the end of the French and Indian War.
I said a treaty.
Yeah, treaty.
That's half right.
Treaty of Paris. And 1763, end of the French and Indian War, Treaty of Paris. King George III puts out a proclamation that says that it is illegal for any white settlers to live beyond the crest of the Blue Ridge, to the west side of the mountains. That is reserved for the native peoples, for the Cherokee and the Shawnee and those people. So that is the law. Do we pay any attention to the law? No, we don't pay any attention to the law. We've got the grand or the golden age of the long hunters going on, and they bring these stories back, and they said there is this beautiful land in what we will eventually call East Tennessee, beautiful land, fertile, well-fed by rivers, and settlers hear about this, and they start moving to the area. We don't know when the first one really appears, but we'll say, 1769 or so. Late 1760s, they start to appear. Well, they can't buy the land, so they come up with this idea. Hey, let's lease the land from the Cherokee. So in 1772, these settlers formed this organization called the Watauga Association. And the Watauga Association leases land from the Cherokee. They give them cash. They give them wagon loads of good. This does not make a lot of people happy. And there's a lot of debate among scholars, and I'm building up to Kings Mountain. Y'all just bear with me for just a minute. There is a lot of discussion among scholars about this. Lord Dunmore, not a scholar, but Lord Dunmore in 1774 says that this Watauga Association was, quote, a dangerous example of Americans forming a government distinct from and independent of His Majesty's authority. Other scholars will go on and say that this right here, this is the Theodore Roosevelt actually says that these men were the first men of American birth to establish a free and independent community on the continent. We can't go quite that far because we don't have the original Watauga Association's paperwork, so we don't know if they actually declared independence from Britain or not. But that's something to keep there in the back of your mind. In 1777, these men started calling themselves the Watauga District. They submitted in the spring of 1776 a petition to Virginia asking Virginia to annex this district. Virginia refused. The committee then drafted a petition dated July 5th, 1776, asking the colony of North Carolina to annex this property. And North Carolina does. And in November of 1777, it becomes Washington County, North Carolina. So that is part of that backstory of these people who have moved someplace and they have started their own government, kind of free from what the British are doing, 10 years before anybody else really gets into this discussion, 7 or 8 years before anybody gets into discussion. Like every other place in the colonies at that point in time, the Washington District and Washington County have a militia. And that militia has gone off to fight in Lord Dunmore's war. They have been to Boonesboro in support of the settlers there. In July of 1776, the British enticed the Cherokees to launch an attack on the settlements along the Watauga, Nolichucky, and Holston rivers. That's where they built Fort Caswell, which we now call Fort Watauga. Fort Caswell was named in honor of the governor of North Carolina, Richard Caswell. Members of the militia, the Washington County, North Carolina militia, were at the siege of Charleston. They fought at Musgrove Mill. So they are literally going up and down the mountain all the time to join other groups to fight the British and to fight the Loyalists. So the militia involvement really angered the British. And I've skipped a whole lot of parts of this story, but we'll move rapidly ahead. The war in the Northern Theater is kind of stalled, and the Southern Theater is really booming. The British have captured Savannah. They've captured Charleston. They've captured many other places we don't have time to talk about. Patrick Ferguson arrives. And Patrick Ferguson, he's a major. He serves in the 71st Regiment of Foot. He's from Scotland. He actually develops this fascinating breech-loading rifle. That is just, had the British adopted that, how would that have changed the course of the American Revolution? They didn't. And I'll jump off here for a minute and say there's actually a local tradition that some of those breech-loading rifles were captured in Kings Mountain, brought back this far, and buried in the county that I live in. Because, yes, but not enough. We haven't found them yet. I know where that question was going. So Ferguson's job is to raise and organize loyalist units from the Carolina backcountry. The war in the 1860s, we're not all one big happy family. And the common analogy is that a third of the people in the colonies were patriots, a third were loyalists, and a third just didn't care one way or the other. And I don't know if those numbers bear out in the war in the 1860s, but there are a lot of people. They're pro-Confederate people, or pro-Union people, and people who just don't care. So you have that in that time period. After the militia victory, the Patriot militia victory at Musgrove's Mill, the militia returned to their communities up over the mountains. And when I say over the mountains, we're talking about what's now Western North Carolina. You had to cross through the mountains, go almost right by my house to get to those fertile lands in what we now call Tennessee. Tennessee won't be a state for almost 20 years, but eventually on into Tennessee. So after Musgrove's Mill, the militia has moved back to their communities, to their homes along the Watauga and the Holston. Ferguson had pursued for a while, but he broke off his pursuit, and he sent a note. He sent a note saying that if the Patriot militia leaders did not come out and lay down their weapons and surrender, then Ferguson would march his men over the mountains and, quote, lay waste to their country with fire and sword. How do you think that went?
Not too good.
Not too good. You're absolutely right. Word went out from the various militia leaders there in the Watauga Valley and the Holston and Nolichucky. Folks like Isaac Shelby and John Sevier and Charles McDowell sent word to other militia commanders, folks like William Campbell and Benjamin Cleveland, the hanging colonel. That's who Benjamin Cleveland is. And so by late September 25th, 1780, there were about 1,100 Patriot forces, give or take a few, gathered at the Sycamore Shoals on the Watauga River. And there's a fantastic state park there today, historic site that I happen to volunteer at a lot. They leave on September 25th of 1780. They cross over the mountains and proceed south. Along the way, other militia groups are meeting them as they march. And so the Patriot militia forces will eventually number 1,500 men. Not all of them are mounted on horses. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. Not long after they come through almost my backyard, about September 27th, September 28th, 1780. Two deserters from this group leave and head toward Ferguson. And they warned Ferguson of the approaching Patriot militia. And Ferguson issued another proclamation begging loyalists to join him and fight, lest they be, quote, pissed upon by a set of mongrels, end quote. Ferguson goes to this place called King's Mountain, and that's his defensive position. And then he sends word back to Lord Cornwallis and Charlotte asking for reinforcements. Ferguson could have, he could have been back in Charlotte. They called it Charlottetown then, in a day. But he didn't. He stayed there on Kings Mountain. Now, if you've ever been to Kings Mountain, that's a little bit disappointing. There's not much of a mountain there. It's just a little hill, but it was owned by the King family who lived there. This is in upstate South Carolina, just a mile or so past the North Carolina line. We'll jump ahead because otherwise we'd be here all night telling this story. It's the afternoon of October 7th. Some of the Patriot forces that are mounted on horses have ridden ahead, and they have discovered Ferguson's men. Before we get there, Moose, you want to put up that first illustration?
Yes, sir.
I had illustrations, completely forgot. So this is some of the routes that some of the Overmountain men took. They left the muster grounds there in Abington, Virginia. As I said before, Tennessee didn't exist yet. It was just a river. But they moved to Sycamore Shoals, and they moved on down. Spruce Pine does not exist at that point in time. They are joined by men from Elkin, from Surrey County, from Wilkes County, North Carolina, as they get to Rutherfordton, or as they get to Morganton, and then they move on down toward Kings Mountain. So if you want to throw up that second illustration, about 900 of the Patriot forces that are mounted have found Ferguson on the afternoon of October 7th. And this map is from the American Battlefield Trust. Patriots soon attacked, and the battle literally goes back and forth. The Patriot forces will make some headway, and at one point Ferguson actually orders a bayonet charge, forcing the militia back down the hill. After about an hour of combat, some of the Patriot militia has worked their way around the rear of the British forces. And when I say British forces, Patrick Ferguson was about the only British soldier there. Almost everybody else on the British side were loyalists. They were people from the various colonies or states by this time, and they were fighting, basically fighting each other. Some of these people knew each other if you dig deeper into this story. Ferguson could be seen riding back and forth across the hill. He was dressed in a check shirt, and he was blowing a silver whistle. Ferguson had sustained a wound at a previous battle and only had use of one of his arms. And he had the silver whistle that he would blow to order men to charge or different commands. But he could be seen there on the top of Kings Mountain, riding back and forth, blowing that whistle, commanding his troops. Portions of Ferguson's men start to surrender. And that really ticks Ferguson off. And he takes out his sword and he's riding around, chopping down these little surrender flags that these men are trying to show. And at that point, Ferguson attempts to lead a charge to break through the lines. He's shot off his horse and out of the stirrup. He is dragged behind the horse. One story is that he's killed that then and there, and another story is that he survives that, and he stands up, and this Patriot demands his surrender, and Ferguson takes out his pistol and kills him. And it's at that point that several other Patriot soldiers fire into Ferguson, and he is killed at that point. On examining his body later, they find 7 bullet holes within him. The battle... There is this other part of the story that many of the loyalist forces were attempting to surrender, and many of the Patriot forces were crying, "Give them Tarleton's quarter," in a reference to the Battle of Waxhaw, fought just a little earlier, in which Some of the British forces killed a number of Continental soldiers after the Continental soldiers had surrendered. Eventually, the Patriot leaders get control of their men. The Loyalists suffer 290 killed, 163 wounded, and 668 captured. And the militia, the Patriot militia, that was the Loyalist Patriot militia, suffered 28 killed and 60 wounded. Ferguson was buried and still is buried on the field at Kings Mountain. He is buried with one of his mistresses who was killed during the battle. Her name is Virginia Sow. His other mistress, Virginia Paul, escapes and is lost to history. We have no idea what happened to her after the battle. Y'all remember Ferguson's earlier proclamation?
About peeing on mongrels.
Several of the Patriots urinated on Ferguson's corpse there on the field. Patriot forces, knowing that Lord Cornwallis is just a day's march away, maybe less if he's gotten word, Patriot forces or Patriot militia turn around and start heading back to the mountain soon thereafter. Some of the captured loyalists were tried on charges and were executed. Some of them, a lot of them, escaped off into the woods. Eventually, 130 of them were delivered to the authorities in Salem, North Carolina. As I started, Kings Mountain is viewed by many as a turning point of the American Revolution. Thomas Jefferson said it was a battle that turned the tide of success. Herbert Hoover said of the Overmountain men that, quote, a small band of patriots turned back a dangerous invasion well designed to separate and dismember the United Colonies. It was a little army and a little battle, but it was of mighty portent. History has done scant justice to its significance, which rightly should place it besides Lexington, Bunker Hill, Trenton, and Yorktown. Even Theodore Roosevelt agreed. He wrote of Kings Mountain that this brilliant victory marked the turning point of the American Revolution. You can go to Kings Mountain today. You can actually trace that route all the way from the muster fields at Abington through Sycamore Shoals. There are maps. It's a national. The route itself is not a national park, but it is a national byway of types. Kings Mountain National Military Park was established in 1931, part of the National Park Service. Our commander-in-chief was just there a couple of days ago visiting that site. For those folks who live in the north, you've probably never heard of Kings Mountain. I don't know how many people we have listening from the north tonight. You probably have never heard of Kings Mountain. If you talk about a turning point of the American Revolution, it's probably going to be the Battle of Saratoga. For us that live in the South, it's the Battle of Kings Mountain. Yeah. That is the turning point. And it's really much more, I think, of a turning point than Saratoga. After the Battle of Kings Mountain, Lord Cornwallis retreats back into South Carolina for a while. And then he heads up in 1781 to Guilford Courthouse, which he wins, but it so beats up his army that he eventually is forced to go to Yorktown, where he is trapped, surrounded by Patriot forces and by French forces, and is forced to surrender. All because of that little battle.
Yeah, well, I mean, academia calls, or they say that Saratoga is the turning point because that's what got France to come in on our side,
right?
And it is significant, but but like you mentioned earlier in the chat, with there was a stalemate in the northern portion of the war. The British thought that they could come down and continue to split the American continental forces with the southern colony, where it was a lot more. I would dare say that it was. I know there was a third across the colonies, but looking at least as my family history, roughly about 50-50 or close to it, with the ideas of the Patriots versus the Loyalists or Tories. They thought they could get more support down here, more success, less troops are having to bring in from, England or anything like that. So really, you look at the fall of Charlestown and Savannah, as well excuse me, as the Battle of Waxhaws, where it was the massacre at the Waxhaws, or even the Battle of Camden, where I believe it was General Greene who was it Greene? No, it was Gates.
Gates.
It was Gates who got his butt kicked there, and the Southern Army completely being either surrendered or destroyed after that. Cornwallis and them wanted to mop up the from the south moving forward the eastern seaboard. So with Cornwallis suddenly having to be stuck and forced to retreat, it makes, like you just said, more of a case for um a real turning point, because the dominoes then we're stalemate over here. This is the only active campaign. You lose that campaign, there you are.
Very true. Very true. And Ferguson's whole role, is to pull in, to galvanize support on the loyalist side, and to pull all these soldiers and men that they thought would join the British forces to continue to fight. And he's there to protect Cornwallis's left flank as Cornwallis arrives in Charlotte and continues his campaign to the north. And that didn't turn out too well.
No, and then of course you throw in after that, the Battle of Cowpens and stuff like that.
Yep.
Can't forget Cowpens, and that being a really small battlefield, like we were talking about before the episode started. One thing I wanted to ask, how was the relationship between Tarleton, Cornwallis, and Ferguson? From some of the stuff that I found during my research, is that they didn't exactly get along and see eye to eye.
No, they didn't.
And that may be one reason why Cornwallis wasn't coming to help, and why Tarleton didn't come either.
From what I've read, the messenger that Ferguson sent Cornwallis got there the day after the battle. And so that messenger saying, hey, we need reinforcements, didn't arrive in time, to have an outcome on the battle. And then, of course, Ferguson gets word not long thereafter Cornwallis gets word not long thereafter that Ferguson's force has been defeated. And, since he's lost, and these are really small armies. I mean, really small. And as we talked about for a moment beforehand, if we look at the war in the 1860s, this is just a mere skirmish. Cornwallis had 2,100 men or so at Guilford Courthouse. And so these are really small forces. And, Ferguson has lost 900, 1,000 men out of Cornwallis's force, which is a significant amount for Cornwallis. And so he has chosen to go back into South Carolina and regroup and replan his attack. So as far as, their relationships among commanders are always contentious to a large degree. Longstreet arrested A.P. Hill, and Lee worked things out, and A.P. Hill gets sent to Jackson, and Jackson has A.P. Hill arrested.
Yeah.
And of course, we could talk about Bragg and his problems with his lieutenants at Chickamauga and other places.
Bragg's not a good example. He denied his own request for boots.
He did, but it's a good example of contentiousness among commanders. That is absolutely nothing new. It's not just true in the 1860s. It's true throughout history. And I do think there was quite a bit of contention going on between the three.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Ferguson's two mistresses named Virginia. There was an account that I found of one of the loyalist soldiers who remarked that was kind of pretty smart on his part to do that. That way, no matter which ear he was whispering sweet nothings in, he didn't get the name wrong.
That's right. Virginia Sal and Virginia Paul. So, and of course, there were people in the 1860s who did that as well. But, we won't talk about Van Dorn or anything, or Kilpatrick or anything. But it's a fascinating piece of the account of the battle I think women were much more prevalent in the Revolutionary War armies than they were in the Union and Confederate armies of the 1860s. There were still women there, but there were a lot of women who signed on with their husbands in both the Patriot and the British armies.
Well, I mean, you look. Granted, we do have our heroines of the Confederacy. Belle Boyd or Emma, whose last name always I forget, but with one of Forrest's raids. But we don't have a Molly Pitcher, so to speak, like we do with the American Revolution, and the fact that
Right.
Molly Pitcher wasn't a singular person. I mean, there
No.
was a term for a bunch of the camp followers that for what we would call in the War of 1860s. But the women that followed the army and would fetch water and stuff like that during the hot heated battles. So one question that did come up was that there was a hold on one second. That
Sounds like dinner's done.
Well, on that note, we'll take a quick commercial break. We'll take a Pop-Tart break.
Pop-Tart, yes.
Since GCB has been nice enough to give me that lovely segue. Remember, tonight's Pop-Tart break. Dagnabbit.
I'm back.
That might have just made my day. Oh, that was beautiful.
Listen, I had that secondary interview, and I had to get supper started. So just Carl, whenever he's on, is all the time cooking. So this one time, I think we can be excused.
Yep, fair enough. But
anyway, we'll take a break here in a minute from word from our sponsors. And Commander-in-Chief Bo Shears put this on here, but I saw it somewhere else in the and I'm assuming he's talking about the national park video. But I saw it earlier in the comments that that Cornwallis and Tarleton were both sick, and said that's the reason why they didn't go and support Ferguson.
I have read that in the past as well. That was part of the reason that Cornwallis, of course, Cornwallis didn't know. And if Cornwallis doesn't know, Tarleton probably doesn't know either, that, Ferguson's being attacked until the day after the battle is over. So
right.
That probably plays just as much of a part of the equation as them both being under the weather, being sick. So
now one question that I and it may not one question that I've had with the and it may just be on the broader scope of the campaign, not just the battle. So take it that in that context. How engaged were the Cherokee during the Southern campaign?
So in 1776, the British will incite them to raid heavily along the frontier. And when I say frontier, I mean where I live here in Western North Carolina, the mountains of Western North Carolina, the foothills on up into Virginia, in the mountainous area and the foothills of Virginia to a degree. I mean, they're giving them rifles and powder and shot and all of those things. And there are several attacks, mostly localized, but the Cherokee do lay siege to Fort Watauga in I think it was May of 1776. And the settlers there in that area, Watauga, Nolichucky, Holston, hear of that, and they go to the Sycamore Shoals area, and they fortify around, the certain house and cabins and everything, which is what the reconstruction is of. Lay siege, and then that drags on for a while, and then the Cherokee eventually kind of give up and go back. And then we get to Rutherford's expedition later that march into the some of the lower and middle Cherokee towns and literally just burn them to the ground, destroy all their food, all their supplies, a few skirmishes here and there. And then the lower middle Cherokee are forced to evacuate into some of the upper Cherokee. So after that, after 1776, it kind of dies down a little bit for 2 or 3 years. And this allows the Over Mountain men and the militias of Washington County, North Carolina, and Sullivan County to go out and participate in some of these battles, toward Charleston, toward Wilmington, and these other places, and to support the other efforts of the other Patriot forces that are in the field. The Cherokee do kind of get riled back up again there later on. I think it's 1782, 1781. And then as we move on, some of the Over Mountain men, and especially John Sevier, will lead expeditions against what are called the Chickamauga Cherokee down toward Chickamauga, Georgia, later on. There's a fascinating book, not one that I got off my shelf that I can recommend on that, but I'll have to send you the link later.
Please do, because we're definitely going to have
Yes.
people asking about it. Ron Kennedy.
The name of the book is
asked-
The Demand for Blood. Hang on, let me see if I can find it real quick.
Well, while you're looking, Ron Kennedy asks, what was the main Christian denomination followed by the majority of the over the mountain folk? Were they primarily from Northern Ireland, which does go into the whole Scotch-Irish, Ulster Scots portion of it?
Well, the simple answer is Baptist and Methodist.
That is a surprise for me, because I would have expected Presbyterianism.
No, the Baptist and Methodist are the two predominant groups, Christian groups, along in the wilderness at that point in time. In fact, there's a church over there, one of the earliest churches. We actually went to their 250th anniversary, called Sinking Creek. It is and they have one of the oldest buildings around. Sinking Creek Baptist Church was founded in, bear with me here. No, we couldn't have done this 10 years ago like this. But I've just pulled this out. It's actually the oldest church in the state of Tennessee. It's called Sinking Creek Baptist Church. Anyway, it's founded in that time period. I think somebody else mentioned Reverend Doak a little while ago. He was Methodist, I think. So no, and a lot of that stems from this reasoning. You could be a Baptist or a missionary lay leader. The Presbyterians require their ministers, pastors, to be educated.
Yeah.
So as a Baptist, I could say, hey, I feel called to preach, and people of the local church will ordain me, and I can go out and preach. Presbyterians require their ministers to be educated. So I think that's part of the difference early on. I know where I live here in the little spot in Western North Carolina, we don't get our first Presbyterian church till 1900. So, but we've got Baptist and Methodist in 1790.
Well, and just the reason why I would think Presbyterianism, just because of the Scots and the fact that most Baptist sects descend from Anabaptists in Germany and stuff like that is and I never thought about the Methodist, the whole Wesleyan thing. But man, that is very interesting. So one thing that Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief Walter D. Donnie Kennedy asks, is it true that there were more skirmishes and battles fought in South Carolina than any other colony?
I've heard that too, but to be honest, I've never sat down and counted. We'll have to research that one out a little bit. There were a ton in South Carolina and Georgia, North Carolina, but as far as an actual number, I've heard that, but I've never. I apologize, Commander Kennedy. I have never sat down and actually looked that one up.
All right. So One thing I've never fully understood, and you mentioned about Ferguson, being in a checkered shirt. Now, other than the fact, well, October's really still warm, at least down here in Mississippi. Um, why, even though he held a royal commission, officers commission, was he in just another, just plain clothes shirt? Was it trying to fit with the men, or does history really know that?
No, history doesn't really know that. But I will speculate, since he did not have the use of one of his arms, maybe he couldn't get into it.
Yeah, that elbow, that ball to the elbow really,
Yes.
really didn't help. What were the loyalists armed with?
Mostly smooth bores, typical brown bess, of different patterns, and we probably don't need to get into that, because I would embarrass myself trying to tell the difference between the different patterns of brown besses. But most of them were armed with smooth bores. A lot of the Patriot militia forces were armed with rifles. So that presents a interesting scenario. The British forces, the loyalist forces, could load a whole lot faster. And they had bayonets. Most of the Patriot forces that had rifles, it takes a lot longer to load that rifle than it does to load that smoothbore brown bess. But your rifle, and you can't put a bayonet on most of them, but your rifles are much more accurate. So they could pick off loyalist forces as they moved up the mountain. And there are plenty of descriptions of them, of the Patriot forces, hiding behind trees and rocks and whatever cover was available to them. They would fire, and then they would scoot behind cover to reload, because it takes time to reload a rifle in that time period. Commander, you're probably right. He knew they were coming. He wore a tablecloth. I don't remember. We talked about Elizabeth and I talked about this earlier, and we couldn't remember if his checkered shirt was red or blue. I went with red, and she went with blue, but we didn't have time to look it up.
Well, every artist depiction that I've seen, it is a red checkered shirt. Now, an artist depict. Well, it was Trione's picture that's going in mind the most, and he does pretty good research on.
He does phenomenal research. So it was probably red, but we couldn't decide. In the 5 minutes I had before I jumped online with y'all this evening. But David Pope has posted that Reverend Doak was Methodist, and I thought he was. Just, it's not something I've looked up recently. And so actually, I believe Washington College, which was a very early school, was a Methodist institution that was established over here. So back to the religion question, it's predominantly Baptist and Methodist here on the frontier, in the wilderness. And we're not even considered frontier. We're the wilderness. Frontier ends about where I-77 runs through North Carolina. That's the frontier. That's where Charlottetown is, and Salisbury is, and Salem. That's the frontier. We're out here with the savages, as they would have said in that time period.
Well, it's very interesting that you mentioned Boonesboro. The of course being the home of Daniel Boone and everything like that, which is a reason why we're only talking about first half of the season. It may be the whole season where we talk about 1776, or at least the American Revolution. There's so much more that we don't hit on. I'm glad we got to pick a topic that's right in your backyard, because that's one of the things that you've been on for several years now, is that your local history is just as important as national history.
Mm-hmm.
Your local history in your backyard is what really needs to be preserving, because that's your community.
Right. And each of us, I don't know how many people are with us tonight. I can't see
41.
Every one of y'all, 41 of y'all. You need to work on the history in your backyard. Yes, it's great to write, or research and talk about people of national importance, whether it be Thomas Jefferson or John Adams or Robert E. Lee or somebody. but it's people in your backyard. When go to the post office or the grocery store, or I'm at the gym, people don't come up and ask me about Thomas Jefferson. People come up and ask me about, what do you know about this event that took place in 1941 in one of the communities around where I live? That's 90% of the conversations that I have. And, each of us, all 40 of us on the page tonight, we have to be concerned with the history in our backyards, because if we're not doing it, it's not getting done. And of course, that's a sermon I preach all the time.
Me and you actually talked about this last time you were on.
I'm sorry. That's just my soapbox.
Don't be sorry.
We have to do a better job of capturing and telling people about that history. If history's not getting told, it's our responsibility, and if it's not getting told, it's our fault.
Right, and if a local community can bond together over a freaking football, baseball, or basketball team, dance team, we're equal opportunity offenders over here. Then they can surely bond together about their local history and stuff like that. The thing that makes their section of the country unique.
Yes, and there are so many people interested in that. So I live a little place called Avery County, North Carolina. I've lived here for almost 22 years. And I have a Facebook page called Avery History Hunters. We are just shy 400 or 500 people of 20,000 members on that Facebook page. There are only 17,000 people who live in this county. So, and we talk about everything. Of course, my first love is the 1860s. But we talk about everything, every little piece of history. And you, for absolutely free, can set yourself up your own little Facebook page to talk about the history of your county or your community. And if you want help, drop me a line. Look me up, michaelchardy.com. There's a contact form on there. And, I'll be glad to help you with it, share history. Because there are people out there, we talk all the time about how people are not interested in history anymore. And that's partially true, but there are people out there who are interested, whether it be about Kings Mountain. And it's something, I talk about a lot. One of the things we do is we volunteer as historic interpreters at Fort Watauga at Sycamore Shoals State Park. Not only for the regular events that they have, but we literally will contact the park folks and say, hey, can we come over there this Saturday? And they say yes, and they open one of the cabins, and we're just there to talk history, to share, to chat with people who just happen to walk by. You can do that too, wherever it is that you live.
Yeah, one of the pages that I belong to is from my mother's home county, and I got on there to try to find pictures of the family and stuff like that. But it's the county's bicentennial this year, and was going through looking at that, and the Pearl River, which is a tributary into the Mississippi. There are pictures from the turn of the century, the 1890s, of an actual steamboat traveling down the Pearl River, which when you look at it down in that area is not that you would never think that a steamboat would travel that river. I never thought of it and lived on right beside the river, but that's a piece of history that I never knew the picture existed, and B, never would have thought about it yourself. So you learn more about your community, and also especially those of us that are interested in genealogy, learning about our ancestors and the stuff that they went through, whether it's the folks from the Great Depression or the turn of the century, or Reconstruction, the war, or the antebellum or colonial period. I mean, you want to know that local history so you can understand, especially if your family's been in the same community for 7, 8, 9 generations.
Mm-hmm.
You learn that you can understand the struggles that made you who you are today.
Yep, exactly. And if we're not doing it, it's not getting done. Plain and simple.
Way to call me out there, Chief, on the flowing into the Gulf, not the Mississippi River. I thought they connected. There's some river that connects to it.
Doing this live is a challenge. I see Carl Jones has posted that Daniel Boone was the brother of his 8th great grandfather. which is there's a lot of Boone history where I live. He lived down the mountain, hunted in this area, got lost in this area, long hunted in this area for months at a time. And then, of course, he's over there in present day East Tennessee with some of those treaties are being signed between the Watauga settlers and the Cherokee. And then he's on up into Fort Boonesboro. And it's just, people are interested in that type of history. Just trust me, if people know that you're interested in history and local history, they will find you. I was at the Y the other day on the treadmill, and some guy walked up. I actually know this guy from church, walked up, and we talked for 45 minutes. He talked. I was up there huffing, puffing. But he stands there and he talks for 45 minutes, and he wants to share. He's not an old guy, 70-ish, probably not quite 70-ish. And, he just wanted to share and wanted to know what I could contribute to what he remembered of the communities that he grew up in. If people learn that you are interested, they will search you out. They will call you on the phone. They will send you notes, messages on Facebook or emails. They will search you out. Now, it's a challenge being young doing this. I kid you not, I'm not that young anymore. But once people figure out that you really do know your stuff and you are interested in their stories, they're pretty good with it.
Hold on.
I really wish I had that old picture. Connor's frozen again.
Okay.
I am not frozen.
No, it just got quiet all of a sudden.
Oh yeah.
I can't walk, talk, chew bubble gum, send pictures to Walter D. Donnie Kennedy, and let Ron know that I've sent him over to Kennedy. But speaking of the Kennedy twins, it's a great segue for us to talk about our sponsors, which are them and their new book, Jefferson Davis, The High Road to Emancipation and Constitutional Government. I still haven't had a chance to break into this yet, but I'm about to be essentially living at work for the next foreseeable future. And during the downtimes when I'm not running around doing things, I will be reading that.
Well, you're in for a treat there, GCB. The High Road to Emancipation and Constitutional Government is about Jefferson Davis being a leader to a higher road of emancipation. He looked for a day in which slaves would be prepared to live in a life, to live a life in society. He did more than just advocate for a high road of emancipation. He practiced his beliefs of the ultimate emancipation of Southern slaves. Many of his former slaves left for prosperity, and their testimony about their former master prepared them for freedom in society.
Very cool. We've touched on going back to the questions that I had. We touched on the firearms that were used. We've touched on Tarleton just a little bit. Really want to dive into him more, which we will when we revisit. What are we doing, Francis Marion, Moose?
Let me pull up the chat schedule.
I believe it's April.
I think you're right.
I think it's April, and then the week after we'll be doing a review of The Patriot, which is loosely based on loosely based on them. But just to get some relevance. You want to come on in April and talk about the Swamp Fox?
I will have to double check that.
Check your schedule.
Make sure I'm not previously engaged. April starts getting really busy around here. I come out of winter hibernation.
Yeah. When are you heading back up to the observatory?
To officially work Friday and Saturday night, but I may go tonight and go comet hunting.
Well, it'll be a good night for it. It's clear down here in Mississippi, but we got rain coming in tomorrow.
It's clear here, or it was an hour ago, so we'll see.
Did 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 you get to observe the balloon?
No, it was it came through Western North Carolina, but it was on the other side of Asheville from me. And I had some Facebook acquaintances that it passed within observation range of their houses, and they snapped a few long range pictures of the balloon. But I'm kind of happy it stayed over there. I'm sure the people in Asheville enjoyed that.
Well, I'm glad they did. uh, what I love were the memes about it.
Oh yeah,
Being a
was
Tennessee
amazing.
fan, our quarterback who's got an arm on him like there's no tomorrow, but the accuracy of a freaking shotgun. Uh, there's a picture of him with a lawn dart. I said, bring it over Tennessee, and I said, I think he can reach it, but I don't think he can hit it.
right, right. So
Well, anyway, Mr. Hardy, we have been at it for an hour. We appreciate you coming on. We hope everybody that tuned in enjoyed tonight's episode. Hope y'all are enjoying our theme that we're doing next month, with it being March. We are studying.
Lees of the old Virginia.
So Robert E. Lee's family and everything like that. Then, of course, we'll be going into the Swamp Fox and then continuing on. So definitely tune in. It'll be great next month or next week. I believe we're having rescheduled Commander's Comments.
Yes, this month's Commander's Comments will be on February 16th. So please remember that. We'll have our Chief of Heritage Operations, Mr. Ron Kennedy, and our Commander-in-Chief, Jason Boshears, otherwise known as my father, on, and they will be talking about a wide variety of things.
You look nothing like him. Next week, we'll do something fun, I'm sure. Not sure what we're doing. Week after, we've got Carl Jones, and of course, rounding out the month, no pun intended, Adam Southern. So definitely tune in to Look Around the Confederation, which is on Thursdays. Check out our other shows, Alamo City Guards, chat with Christian Lee, as well as Look Around Southwest Florida. Get involved in your communities, get your camps involved. Stuff's getting warmer. Remember, it is February, so don't forget about our Black Confederate heroes. When General Stephen D. Lee gave us the charge, he did not differentiate between which group of Confederates that it was. We're to defend the good name of all Confederate soldiers. So go out there, tell their stories, learn some history. Tune in for our other shows. We'll be doing a replay of this on Wednesday.
Yes, and make sure to tune in Thursday. We're having something very special, our first ever state of a division address. We will have the Louisiana Division Commander coming on, giving an update on what is happening in the Louisiana Division of the Southern Confederates.
Well, that will be fun. Anyway, guys, hope y'all enjoyed it. We're going to end the broadcast here. Before we do, Michael, is there a list of the Patriots who participated in the Battle of Kings Mountain anywhere that you know of?
Right here on my desk.
Hey, prepared.
I meant to mention a couple of books, and I'll run through like three of them really quick. The Watagans by Max Dixon. Max Dixon talks about little book talks about that. Probably the standard history of the battle is called Kings Mountain and Its Heroes, written by Draper. Fantastic book. I really enjoy this. There's a book called The Lost State of Franklin, which covers a lot of the same things. America's First Secession. I read this last year and it's really good. But there is a book by Bobby Gilmer Moss called The Patriots at Kings Mountain. And it is a list of everybody that they could find, a lot of it through pension records, of men who claimed to have fought at the Battle of Kings Mountain. Did they have an actual muster roll sheet when those 1,100 men mustered at Sycamore Shoals? No, they did not. But that is the standard reference work. It's called The Patriots of King Mountain by Moss.
All right. And then do you know of a place where anybody can find any good firsthand accounts directly, or just check the bibliography of those books?
So Robert Dunkerley, it goes by Bert Dunkerley, wrote a book actually called The Battle of Kings Mountain Eyewitness Accounts.
There you go, J-Bo.
So those are the books. Those are the books I have on that subject. So if you want to know about books, shoot me a note. Maybe I can help. I have a lot of them.
That he does.
We can see.
That's a fraction.
Oh, when I grow up, I want to have a library like yours.
Same.
Well, you have to start now. You know, I bought my first book when I was 10 about the war when I was 10. And, you know, it's just a couple of books a month is what it takes to build a really good library.
Yeah, but my mother's standing in the kitchen giving me the evil eye when I mentioned bringing more books into her house. We've got.
So
I've got
Walter
a lot-
Kennedy says that he has 2 other books on Kings Mountain. I actually have other books on Kings Mountain as well. Those are just the ones that
Having a book off.
I would recommend, especially Drapier. Just he and I wish they would digitize his papers. He was a historian, I think in Wisconsin or someplace, but he was fascinated with the battle, and he actually wrote voluminous amount of letters to the sons and grandsons of men who fought at Kings Mountain, asking them for the stories that had been passed down in their family. And that's what a lot of that book is based off of. Just, I have his papers, some of his papers. He wrote on Daniel Boone too. The Daniel Boone, the microfilm Daniel Boone papers are 7 reels. And then I don't know how many his Kings Mountain project is, but they have a bunch of them at our university, a couple counties away.
Good God.
I'm talking like 30, 40 reels of microfilm of his correspondence regarding Kings Mountain. And I keep saying one day I'm going to sit down and go through that, and I haven't found that day yet.
I couldn't imagine having to read.
Well, I don't understand why they don't digitize it, but since it deals with, you know, us poor folks here in the mountains, maybe that's why.
Well, maybe there's a grant out there somewhere for you to do it, but I remember, I thank God every day for Fold 3.
Yes.
Because back when I joined the SCV, it was the ye old days of going to the archives, pulling the microfilm,
Yep.
rolling. Oh, I rolled too far, roll backwards.
Yep.
And because of the rolling and people not taking care of the film pieces, you know, being scratched up and impossible to read, and just
I wish they would digitize Draper's papers. I mean, that would be such a boon to research. It really would. But that's not happened yet.
Well, there's always hope.
There is.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, a grant somewhere out there.
Somewhere.
You know?
Maybe that can be part of the Build Back Forever. Anyway, guys, Michael, appreciate you being on.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate everybody that watched it. Remember, check out our other episodes. Check out everything. Rewatch this episode, especially there around a couple minutes ago, Mark, if you want to find those books. Michael, if you'll send Moose the names of those books, we'll post them out there. Guys, hope y'all have a great one. We'll holler at y'all next week. Remember, in the words of the late, great Harold Philpott, no Fumar in the elevator.
No